Okay,
I
I want to turn it back to Dustin, who also has a question, and then they're going to open it up.
Yeah, I
Thank you,
figured,
Danielle.
I was going to ask, open it up for Q&A, and I figured part of running this thing is maybe I could use my ask my own question first. So
Yeah.
I was gonna ask about, you mentioned about how some of the most popular types of porn are these taboos of the stepmother and son, the stepfather, or the mother. There's all these. Those are some of the most popular like themes, I suppose, internationally.
Yeah.
And so I was wondering what you think about how the Oedipus complex could be changed for kids who are getting to access to already before they even have sex, to just thinking, it's not like the same taboo anymore if it's all over the place and the most popular thing. So I wonder how that affects them consciously.
I think that what's happening with these younger generations is that they don't want any limits. They don't want limits. In our, I'm talking about me and Spyro, and whoever else is in this generation. We were raised psychoanalytically, thinking that you were born in one body and you had to, part of the developmental tasks were to accept the body you were born in and to accept who you could and couldn't have sex with. You could not have sex with a parent, right? You should have sex with the opposite sex. You have to come to terms with the body you were born with and the gender that's assigned to that body. And we saw that as development, right? If somebody was able to accept limitation and reality, then they were healthier than someone who wasn't. Today, when things are, opening up and people can be, can identify as not this gender or that gender, or, transgender or non-binary gender or gender curious, gender curious is gender questioning. It shows that there's no end to that process. It's a continual process. Same thing with sexuality, pansexuality, polyamory. That the boundaries that we used to have about what could and couldn't be are dissolving. And so we have to, as analysts, think about how are we defining health or development, if anything goes, in terms of how we identify, in terms of what we can do and with whom we can do it. Now, the internet porn, one of the things about pornography is you can go places that you can't go in real life, right? That's one of the things about fantasy, and pornography comes from fantasy, right? That we can, whatever is not allowed in real life, we still, it doesn't mean we don't want that, but we can see it played out either in our fantasies or in pornography. So your question is a good one. If we start seeing all of these things played out, and we see that perhaps if there's a breaking down of those boundaries, well, what happens? Where do we feel any kind of limit other than our own shame and guilt? But that can even fuel the excitement, as we've already seen. I don't have a final answer to that, but I do think that it's going to morph young people's sexuality differently.
Okay, thanks. I'm gonna just let somebody else. There's a couple of questions. I was gonna go to Martin. Actually, we have a question from Martin Frommer. If you want to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Happened in the culture that has created the phenomenon that we see in terms of the divergence of gender expression?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's what's happening in the culture in general that, and in particular with gender, but not only, that they don't want to be limited. They don't want limitations, that they want to create themselves. There's kind of a self-creation. You're not going to tell me who I am, what I can do, who I can be with. I want to be the master of that. I want to decide they don't want to say, oh, I'm only, Judith Butler wrote about the melancholy of gender, of heterosexual gender. Instead of she took Freud's mourning and melancholia and said, people who are heterosexual have to be melancholic about giving up the same-sex attraction. And what we're seeing with younger people now is they don't want to give up anything. They don't want, if they have, this attraction and that attraction, let it be. If they're assigned female or male at birth and they don't particularly identify with it or even want it, they're gonna shed it. So there's perhaps more one could look at it as more creativity around who I am and what I want to be, but there's also influence. They're also influenced by other people who are doing this, but it leaves us with the question of, well, what is the value of limits? What is the value of limits? If we take away all the limits, then how is development changing? How is identity changing? Or is it just reflecting something that always was? We always were part male, part female. We always were attracted to everything and everyone, as in polymorphous perversity. And just taking away that social constraint and facade that says we are only one gender, we can only be with one type of person. Is it new, or is it just an unveiling of something that is there in all of us, and that the young people are more brazen about expressing?
Okay. Well, thank you. Speaking of the limits, I just want to go to, we have a couple people with their hands raised, so I just want to make sure we have some time to see their questions. So Lawrence, would you like to ask?
Yeah, sure. Danielle and Spyros, thank you so much for a very exciting presentation. Lacan will speak about jouissance, and this was in Seminar 20 in the early 70s. And at the same time, noting there is no such thing as a sexual relationship.
Yeah.
And he's not just talking about having sex. He's talking about something much, much more pervasive. And yet, Lacanian psychoanalysis has been pretty much excommunicated from the American psychoanalytic scene. And yet he was onto this early on. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, Danielle, about what he is saying. Is jouissance is at the bottom of everything.
Well, as I mentioned, the French are exceptions to the trend of not talking about sex. Lacan and Lacanians have always been talking about sexuality, about perversion, and his concept of jouissance and of when you're having sex, you're not really having sex, meaning that we always, we are alienated from ourselves, but we are also not completely, our desires can never be fulfilled, because what we desire, if they were fulfilled, we wouldn't be able to handle the excess of that emotion. So the closer we get to fulfilling our desires, the more it involves also pain, which is the jouissance. Jouissance is a kind of joyful pain, right?
It's pretty much just getting off. At sex, each person is merely getting off, and there's no relationship between the two. It's about getting off, and however one gets off.
Well, no, that's no, I don't agree. I think it's not just about getting off. Jouissance is about a pleasure, but a pleasure that comes with pain.
Yeah.
And it comes with pain because there's never a real connection, which is what you were saying. There's always, we think we're connecting, but it's always a mésalliance.
Right.
As Freud talked about,
Sure.
a mésalliance, a false connection. We think the person is what we think they are. They're actually something else. We think we are who we are. We're actually something else. So it's about two people meeting and having false ideas of who the other is. So it's a fascinating theory when we think about it.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. John Mills.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle, for all your insights. Yeah, I was wondering when I've read your work and I've read like Andrea Salenz's work, and I'm thinking, how do they get all these patients in the office? And my confession is that because you're an attractive woman, men who have hang-ups and conflicts are going to be inclined to come to see you. Have you found that to be any correlation between that?
Well, that may be a reason. I think many of the men who I write about, they tell me that they also have read or know that I work with sexuality and with perversion. And so they reach me because of that. I recently had somebody who came to me who wanted, not a trans person, who wanted to be castrated because he was a sex addict and couldn't think of any other way. And he found online that I had written a paper on desiring castration. So he found me through that. So I'm not sure whether there's a study on attractiveness. I find that many of the men say they prefer to work with a woman because they feel the woman will be more understanding of their sexual preferences or identities. That I did find. But sometimes there's a strong erotic transference also that they bring.
Just a quick follow-up question. In Ontario, where I live and work, they actually have a law under the Regulated Health Professions Act that if you were even to get into details about a patient's sex life, and they take it the wrong way, you could be charged with sexual abuse under the act.
That's insane. Wow. Well, that could scare therapists from asking about sex. Wow. I didn't know that. Thanks for telling me that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Adriana?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Well, this has been so illuminating and also leaving me a bit confused about what to do in my clinical work. For example, I have this client, he is in his early 50s and had experienced trauma abuse when he was a child, and now he is into pornography and having difficulties with his wife. They don't have sex for a while. She feels betrayed and so on. Mm-hmm. And we have been talking about his early trauma, and I'm sort of linking, his tendency to explore pornography to his trauma. But there is, as you said, a whole culture out there, and the marriage in itself that also, are also important parts of his whole, dilemmas. So I wonder, how do you see trauma, early childhood trauma, and the whole, complexity related to sex and difficulties with that?
Well, Robert Stoller is the master of this. his theory, he believed that perversion really is a manifestation of an attempt to deal with early trauma, and what the person does is actually goes back to the place of trauma, but this time is more in control, is no longer the victim. Now they're in control, and they restage a mise en scène where they now have mastery, but also express a certain revenge and hostility towards the people who traumatize them. So if that fits your patient's scheme, then that can be very, very helpful. The thing is, a lot of people who have perversions don't want them to be explained too much unless they really come with a desire to change it. But a lot of people don't come to therapy because of perversions unless they're caught doing something illegal. And sometimes it won't even come out in treatment until years into the treatment. Sexuality seems to become compartmentalized and can stay outside. But it sounds like your patient is bringing in the trauma, bringing in the marriage, bringing in the sexuality. And so you can definitely make those connections.
Well, thank you. The dilemma is how much we dig into the trauma or how much we normalize within the culture that what is happening.
Well, I think it's up to the patient, right? How they feel comfortable, I always take my lead from the patient rather than me feeling I have to tell them, you go here or do that. More having them explore different connections, different avenues, and then see where they take it and how they feel about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. William Freed.
Thank you so much. The interview that you guys conducted was really fantastic. Spyros and you, Danielle, it was lovely and very informative. Three comments. One is that I think when you think about the French and sexuality, the French are very good talkers about sexuality. I'm not so sure that translates into action. The French, especially Lacan, loves to talk about these things and has invented all kinds of language to discuss it. But that doesn't mean that he throws a tremendous amount of light on the issue, or that he's particularly interested in the activities. The other thing is that when you talk about these guys who prefer the doll to be silent, I think that talks to the whole issue of Freud said, what do women want? I am positive that I know what women want. Women want to be heard. They want to be listened to. So when these guys shut down the doll, that's a very radical kind of action that they're taking. And the third thing, Spyros, has to do with olive oil. I really believe that olive oil was used during the salad days of humanity.
So
is that Spyros? Did you want to respond to that?
Actually, I want to respond to the first point.
Me too.
And the first point having to do with the French and Lacan. I'm also aware that I'm thinking culturally now that psychoanalysis emerged from Europe, and in Europe there were two aesthetics in Europe. The first one was French, and the second one was German. And the French aesthetic was very much like French classical music, beautiful and surface-like. German music could be, symphonic music could be harsh, but it went deep. So I think that there's something about the linguistic turn that this is an opinion now. This is but I think there's a linguistic turn that came with Lacan that didn't quite go deep, which speaks to what you said about the French talking about sex a lot. And I think the Germans having a different kind of aesthetic, and perhaps even a different language. They didn't go broad, but they went deeper in a certain way. So I have a take on the kind of aesthetic that was involved there, the kind of worldview that the Lacanians brought versus, let's say, the early Freudians, and then eventually also some of the Central Europeans, which brought on the Firenze Renaissance. Anyway, let me stop at that. And we should talk about olive oil another time.
Is that why Popeye's girlfriend was called olive oil?
That I don't know.
Okay.
So I think the French actually do have more sex. I happen to, I do. I mean, I know a lot of French. I have a French family, you know, they all have affairs. They're all having sex. And there was a study that compared the French with Scandinavian couples. And they were looking at couples in terms of frequency of sex and also in terms of equality and of household chores and raising kids and things like that. So the Scandinavians are pretty known that they have gender equality much more in their relationships and all of that. And what they found is they had less sex than the French, where there was much more of a power differential. So it makes one, you know, wonder about that, whether somehow equalizing gender roles actually affects sexual activity. And so, for example, I had a patient who has a very feminist, empathetic boyfriend. I write about this in the book, and she loves that about him, and yet in the bedroom she cannot tolerate that. That's not what turns her on. She makes him role play a very macho character for her to get turned on sexually. So, you know, what we like in life, in our everyday life, is not always what we like in the bedroom. And I think that's another topic.
Mention a couple that I'm treating. young, very active, vibrant couple where the guy is very aggressive and wants to have sex, and the young woman is also eager, but she's very variable in her, you know, when she wants to have sex, and he feels often rejected by the fact that he doesn't want to have sex. She doesn't want to have sex when he wants to have sex. But the thing that most disturbs him is that she has two takes on him. One take having to do with a nice, gentle, caring, empathic kind of guy, which she wants him to be sometimes, and the other that she wants him to be an aggressive, macho kind of person.
Yeah.
And he gets very upset because he doesn't know when she wants him to be one way and when the other.
Yeah. I've heard this a lot, absolutely, and I've heard this a lot from men, young men today, that they're getting mixed messages about their masculinity and what women want. So I think that is an issue today in today's culture.
So one of the things that women want
it all.
for the guy.
Women want it all. The question is when.
But they also want the guy to be able to figure out when they want which.
Yeah.
To read their minds in some way.
Yeah.
Does anyone?
Don't be shy. Ask questions or just give comments or clinical examples of anything we've talked about.
Oh, Lawrence, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Spyros, even though he was from Polish origins, Chopin lived so much of his life in France, his music is incredibly sexual. It's very deep. It expresses such anguish and pain and joy and sexuality all over the place. And I happen to feel Lacan does go deep and is anything but surfacey and superficial. As someone who's been studying pretty much only Lacan's work for the last 35 years.
I defer to your knowledge of music, Larry.
What's that, Spyros?
I defer to your knowledge of music.
Oh, well, yeah. Well, I'm a pianist for sure. But Chopin,
but Chopin was Polish.
oh yeah, but he was totally influenced by his time in France. Yeah, his aristocratic. Oh my God.
Well,
The
dichotomies
android.
are always dangerous, aren't they?
Yeah.
Always dangerous.
Okay.
Barbara?
Given all of the sociocultural shifts and pressures and the internet, and do you still, I was trying to glean your own orientation. Am I right that you still see the value of the basic Freudian tenets about human sexuality? Am I right? Or do you feel that the changes in what's going on around us indicate, I'm not talking about strict adherence or allegiance, and I don't mean about, further information we have about human sexuality after Freud, but basic ideas about psychic bisexuality and identifications with both sex parents and the Oedipus complex. And is that something that you yourself still see as pertinent and foundational?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've people often have a hard time telling my orientation because I come from a strong Freudian background, but I've evolved too and added whatever I felt was helpful and relevant from object relational, whatever, all the theories really, including Lacan. But I do think that Freud had so much to contribute to our understanding of sexuality. And I think others have taken it further, but his idea of sexuality being central, being perversion being universal, the Oedipus, I think, should not be thrown out. I think we have to alter it in light of changing family compositions and dynamics. I had a patient who I wrote about in the book, a trans patient who came in one day crying. And I said, "What's going on?" I didn't know. I thought a death, And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "I don't have an Oedipus complex." And I said, "Really? This is why you're crying?" And she said, "Yes." I said, "Why do you think you don't have an Oedipus complex?" And she said, "Well, I'm a transsexual." I said, "So?" And he said, well, transsexuals don't have Oedipus complex. I said, "Who said?" I said, Oedipus complex has to do with, the child's relationship to the parents individually and as a couple. And this patient had two parents. And I said, that's what the Oedipus complex is about. And she was so relieved that she had an Oedipus complex. But I think that when we throw out the Oedipus complex, we, like I said earlier, we throw out a lot of this early passion and conflict and identifications and shifting alliances and jealousies and, so much of what goes into our sexuality as adults. And by doing that, I think we go back to this early idea of, bonding and meshing and dependency and separation. And we miss a lot of that friction and excitement, really, which is part of sexuality, and the guilt and the shame. And so in that sense, I think that, we have to update it with regard to single parents and gay parents and all kinds of, changes, but that still doesn't change that children have to position themselves vis-a-vis their whoever it is that's raising them, the different generation, and how they're they have desires, they have forbidden.
You're really talking about drive theory, sexuality with a small s, as well as not just the sexual act, obviously, but the energy and the drive too.
The drive, yes, I think sexuality is a drive, but I think it's also so relationally,
of course, it's modulated.
Charged.
It's modulated.
So relationally charged. Yeah.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you.
Sheila, hi Sheila, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you very much. It's an amazing discussion. It's a bit late in London now. I hope I'll be coherent. I really enjoyed. I just wanted to bring a point about culture. Do we really ourselves create the culture, or is the culture part of our histories? And I was thinking about there was a discussion a lot about French German, and before the more recent Second World experiences, and there was no mentioning of Shasket-Smirgel, for instance. I think there is a lot of normalization inevitably going, because the world is not the same since then. And she wrote a lot about the anal world, perversion, and what happened in the camps. There were basically, prostitution was quite, next to the camps, there was a lot of perversion going on. This was in her writings. And I think maybe what happened after Freud is not after Freud, but after the Second World War, in a way, the world changed. It's impossible now to talk about this almost Oedipal issues as is, there is no relationships in a meaningful way is destroyed. The murder camps. After that, humanity, I don't think related to the sexuality the way it related before that. So nothing was the same after the Second World War, and the writings of Shasket-Smirgel, or maybe historical connections like Warmut Volkan or Kernberg, they are important. They are still keeping sexuality, but linking with the history. And I think we have to remember that the culture is actually the continuation of the historical experiences as a humanity we lived. So things are not as simple. I think your book
nobody says it's simple. Yeah, and of course it's cultural. Of course it's cultural. Hi, Sheila. I'm glad you could make it. Of course the culture influences us, and what's happening in the culture, we create the culture, but the culture also influences us. It's a mutual relationship. And I think what I found very valuable about Shasket-Smirgel's work is when she writes about the law and how perversion is very. I lost Sheila suddenly. I can't see her.
Okay, if I put it, I think I'll come back.
Yeah, you have to say a word to stay there. Yeah. What I found very helpful in her work is the law and how she connects perversion with a lawlessness.
Yeah.
And perhaps that's how you're seeing, that after World War II, there was so much lawlessness and breaking down of boundaries that the whole society became perverse.
Yeah.
And I think that's also what I wrote about in my previous book on the age of perversion.
Yeah.
That there's something culturally and socially perverse going on, not just individually, but that's another book.
Yeah. I mean, because there was a loss of authority, I think, in the Second World War and in pandemic as well. Yeah, we lost the authority. The father is lost. So we don't talk about Oedipus because we are in such primitive states.
Well, I don't know if we lost authority or if authority went berserk.
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
Hitler was authority. And
Well, I mean, Shaskets Miguel thinks that he was the archaic mother. He promised the abundance, no boundaries, in a perfect world. So does that make sense?
yeah, so much for perfection.
Thank you. Spyros, did you want to react, Spyros?
Yes, I do. I really appreciate the historical perspective for many reasons. And of course, I'm fundamentally a clinician, so but sometimes I wish I was a historian. I think that Danielle is writing about, she doesn't use this phrase, I use this phrase, the third sexual revolution. Okay. The last 100 years, we've had 3 sexual revolutions. The first one was in the 20s. The second one was in the 60s, and I think we're having another one now.
Yes.
And that first sexual revolution happened in the 20s, and I think it could be directly linked to World War I. I think World War I was devastating on the planet. It devastated the minds of what was happening. And I don't think it's an accident that the sexual revolution followed World War I. I can't prove that. I don't know enough about sociology and social history, but I don't think it's an accident. I also don't think it's an accident that it was after that war that psychoanalysis became highly conscious of the social and created its free clinics. I think that that's relevant. I think you had the sexual revolution. I was supervised by Esther Meneke, who lived through the sexual revolution. And when I was talking to her about a patient who had at the time, I thought it was a perversion, she says to me, why does your generation think that they invented sex? You know? So that's one thing. And then I think, and by the way, we also know historically that it was after World War I that surrealism came into play, which was so, and Danielle can speak about that even in greater detail, which was an incredible opening up of the unconscious mind, and also that Freud didn't want anything to do with surrealism.
And very sexualized art too.
Very sexualized art. If you know, but Freud didn't want anything to do with it for various, because he was worried that it would scandalize. He was already worried about scandals and the sexuality stuff. And in the 60s, we had a huge change in the sexual mores of the country, and things started to open up. And I think that this, I don't know how to understand this because it's too complicated for me, but I believe that our theories often follow the culture and follow the history. And I think in a certain way, and I wish I could, and Danielle, you got to write this book. I think that there's something about how our unconscious is affected by the social mores and the social historical context. I'm curious what's going to happen to our unconscious mind now moving into the 3rd year of COVID. What about all these kids who are wearing masks? What's going on with them? And also, what are the implications?
There's COVID pornography, by the way.
Well, there you go.
Just so
there you go. I mean, this is like really amazing stuff. You know? In my consulting room, in my little consulting room, the only thing I have that I could offer is listening very carefully and understanding the levels within levels within levels about what's going on. And I have to be very humble about my understanding of what's going on. But in any event, let me stop there.
Well, I just want to thank you so much, Danielle and Spyros. This was such a rich and compelling discussion and so lively. So thank you so much. If Danielle, you could have that book that Spyros was mentioning done by next year, we will do the second part too.
But I'd love to interview Danielle.
I also want to
Thanks to everybody who came. I'm very grateful to all those who came and listened.
And I wanted to just also thank Megan, Elizabeth, and Danielle for all your help with creating the event today. If you've enjoyed the presentation, please consider joining ASPP or rejoining the society. So with that, I will just say thank you so much again for attending, and I hope you stay warm and enjoy.
Thanks, Dustin.
Thank you, everybody.